Hey everybody, and welcome to the video. This is the Gnostic creation myth, and I am just going to read this off of GnosticismExplained.org. It's called the Gnostic creation myth. One of the things that set Gnosticism apart from the other varieties of early Christianity was its astonishing creation myth, an interpretation of the creation myth of Genesis that practically turns that Old Testament text upside down. So, I wanted to go as far back, as I could. So, this goes back to the archons. To briefly summarize, the archons in Gnosticism was God the Father gave rise to a host of spiritual beings, or archons, who populated heaven, which the Gnostics called pleroma, or the fullness, including a divine mother and Christ. One of the last of these beings to emanate from the Father, Sophia, or wisdom, she gave birth to a new being of her own, without the involvement of her partner or the approval of the Father. The being born under such circumstances was nothing like the perfect inhabitants of the pleroma. Instead, he was ignorant and malevolent. This was the demiurge, which means craftsman, whom the Gnostics identified with the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh. He created the material world to mirror his own wicked personality and trapped sparks of divinity, or sparks, from the pleroma within humans. It was then up to Christ to awaken humans to their true nature and liberate them from the world. So we're going to go to the secret book of John, which is what they have cited here. And they're going to read it. We're going to read it straight out of the secret book of John. The creation myth of the secret book of John. In the beginning, there was only the One, the Father, who is illimitable, since there is nothing before it to limit it. Unfathomable, since there is nothing before it to fathom it. Immeasurable, since there was nothing before it to measure it. Invisible, since nothing has seen it. Eternal, since it exists eternally. Unutterable, since nothing could comprehend it to utter it. Unnameable, since there is nothing before it to give it a name. The Father was surrounded by luminous spiritual water. He gazed into the water and saw his reflection. His reflection became Barbelo, the mother, his female counterpart. Barbelo was also called Pronoia, forethought, because she was the first thought of the Father. Barbelo asked for the Father to grant her foreknowledge, incorruptibility, life eternal, and truth. The Father granted her request. Foreknowledge, incorruptibility, life eternal, and truth came into being and glorified their father and mother. The Father gazed into Barbelo, and she conceived by him. She gave birth to a spark of light similar to the Father's light. This was the Son, who was also called autogenous, or self-generated, since he was at the bottom identical with the Father. He was further called the Christ, a name greater than every name ever uttered. The Father anointed the Son with his goodness, which passed his perfect goodness onto his Son, and the Son glorified his Father and Mother. And just as Barbelo had asked the One to give her new aeons, the Son asked to be given another mind. The Father and Mother agreed, and mind arose and glorified its Father and Mother. And mind wanted to bring something else into being through the Father's word. So will was born, followed by word. The Father made the Son the master of all power and truth. From the Son came the four luminaries, Hermozel, Auriel, Davathe, and Eliath. Each came into being with three additional aeons along with its own. The three aeons with Hermosa were grace, truth, and form. The three with Oriel were insight, perception, and memory. The three with Devathe were understanding, love, and idea. And the three with Elileth were perfection, peace, and Sophia, wisdom. Next was the perfect human, Pigordamus, Adam the stranger, holy Adam, or old Adam, who came into being and glorified the Father. He was placed in the aeon of Hermosa. Adam had a son, Seth, who was placed in the aeon of Oriathel. He was set to preside over the souls of the saints, those with gnosis, or knowledge, in the aeon of Davathe. But the souls of those who were not saints, but would nevertheless repented eventually, were given a place of their own in the aeon of Eliath. Sophia watched these marvelous radiant beings all around her. A desire to give birth to an aeon of her own arose within her, but she acted on her own desire impatiently and impulsively. She didn't bother to involve her divine partner, nor obtain the consent of the Father. Since she had descended from the Father, she was full of his tremendous power, and she was able to give birth to a new being that contained some of her divine essence. But because this new entity had been conceived by Sophia alone, it didn't resemble the other immortals. Instead, it was hideous and misshapen. It was like a snake with a lion's head, and its eyes burned like lightning. In fear and shame, Sophia cast her son out of the divine realm, the pleroma or fullness, in the hope that none of the other inhabitants of that perfect place would ever see him. To conceal him further, she enveloped him in a shining cloud and placed him on a throne in the middle of it. She called him Yaldabaoth, which means child of chaos, and he has since been called Sakla, the fool, and Samael, the blind god. Yaldabaoth mated with mindlessness in him and generated 12 archons, demonic beings who would shortly come to rule the earth from the celestial spheres above it. Adoth, Harmos, Kalia Ombri, Yabel, Adonios, Sabaoth, Cain, Abel, Abrasine, Yobel, Armapiel, Melchior Adonan, and Belias. Because of Yaldabaoth's foolishness, he was wicked and ignorant of his ancestry, and he belligerently proclaimed, I am God, and there is no other God beside me. His 12 original archons generated new archons until there were 365 of them over each day of the year. Note the 12 here, y'all. Remember this recurring 12 theme. As Sophia's son Yaldabaoth had the model of the pleroma within himself, he created the material world based on that model. But because of his ignorance and depravity, it came out all wrong. It was corrupted and far inferior simulacrum of the divine model. Sophia watched all of this and was stricken by distress and guilt. She wept and repented for giving birth to such a monstrous entity. And the Father, full of perfect love, heard her pleas and promised to forgive her and restore her to her former stature. But first she had to stay in the ninth heaven, the layer of the sky closest to the pleroma, above Yaldabaoth and the 7 archon-populated heavens below him, until she had atoned for her sin and mended her deficiency. Meanwhile, Yaldabaoth and his archons saw an image of the heavenly Adam from the Father's pristine realm. They didn't know where it come from, but they were enthralled by it. They decided to attempt to create a human being for themselves. But at first their creation lay lifeless on the ground, and they couldn't figure out how to animate it. As they stood around the mobile body, puzzling over what to do, the gracious beings of the pleroma came up with a plan to help the part of Sophia that had become trapped in Yaldabaoth and help it return to her so that she could return to the pleroma. Emissaries from the pleroma appeared to Yaldabaoth and advised him to breathe his spirit into Adam's face, after which they assured him that the body would awaken and stand up. Yaldabaoth did so, and Sophia's power fluttered out of him and into Adam, bringing the first man to life. bringing the first man to life. Because of Sophia's power within him, he was already wiser and more spiritual and more intelligent than his creators. So, out of jealousy and resentment, the archons made Adam mortal. They placed him in the Garden of Eden, which they filled with all kinds of scrumptious foods to make him attached to material pleasures and distract him from his true divine nature. The archons wanted to possess Adam's divine insight for themselves, so they took it out of Adam and created a new being to house it in, Eve. When Adam saw her, he instantly recognized her as his spiritual counterpart. At Christ's urging, Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, or Gnosis, and grew in their understanding and their superiority over their creators. Now, boiling with hatred and envy, Yaldabaoth raped Eve and cast her and her mate out of the garden. 2 sons were born from this tragic event, Cain and Abel, called Yahweh and Elohim, 2 names for God in the Old Testament. But Adam and Eve later had loving, consensual sex on their own, and the product of their union was an enlightened boy whom they named Seth, after the son of the heavenly Adam. Yaldabaoth couldn't bear the fact that there were now 3 kings in his creation who were enlightened and superior to him. He forced Adam, Eve, and Seth to drink the water of forgetfulness so that they would lose their gnosis. But the capacity to revive gnosis lay dormant within them, and Yaldabaoth wasn't capable of expunging it completely, and their spiritual descendants among humankind remain capable of regaining that saving illumination. All they need is a Savior, and that's Jesus Christ, to reveal it to them as he did for their first ancestors. So this is pretty much how the agnostics, or these are the Dead Sea Scroll sects. This is pretty much how they seen creation. Notice they have Christ saving them from Yahweh, which, we're going to go deeper into this, but Christ, he really doesn't claim Yahweh in the New Testament. But came from the Secret Book of John, and it says, as the Secret Book of John implies, this story was meant to serve as an addition to the Gospel of John, a prequel. In terms of plot, it sets the stage, and in terms of theology, it provides a context for understanding John's Gospel through a Gnostic lens. The same can be said of the relationship between the various versions of the Gnostic creation myth and the shared Christian story of Jesus' life. But it was also a central, important story to the Gnostics and a stand-alone tale on its own right. It bound the Gnostic community together as a distinct community and illustrated the key concepts in the Gnostic worldview, such as Gnosis and anti-cosmicism. And as a myth, it did so with a verve and poignancy that bare conceptual discourse cannot muster. So I found this real interesting. This is about the archons. This is where wisdom and grace and the higher mind. These now we're going to start getting into the rays where the ascended masters come from, and I'm going to go into the Numa Elish and the Arudu are going to be next. We're going to talk about Marduk and Tiamat. So I hope that you will join us next time for story time. For back in the day, because in the beginning, thank you for being here. Please hit that like button on your way out. It's very important to keep us in the algorithm. Thank you. Namaste. And God bless you.